Hello, I am talking about adulting, communities, and reflecting on that. This is coming from somebody who has lived in Boston, Massachusetts, New York City, and now Chicago, Illinois, and I am 25, or otherwise, my quarter life crisis, for better or worse. That is a joke. That is not quite funny. But I'd say, looking back, it's that I lived in Boston, Massachusetts for a bit. And for all these different cities, I'd say cumulatively, I've spent over a year in these different cities, and it gave me good exposure into what they had in store, and just more reflecting for my personal perspective of what each had going for them and just my takeaways from them. This isn't like all exhaustive because I'd say that's something better to ask more like natives in particular, but just like a transplant who somehow found themselves through work and different opportunities of all these different places. So, with that in mind, when I was living in Boston, I was working for that big, not so much retailer store, or like that e commerce store that has gone through ebbs and flows, known as like Wayfair in particular. I felt like in Boston, I was either talking to somebody who was working at a college, going to college, working at a hospital, or working at Wayfair. And I think my takeaway from Boston was that it is a very cold city, and you can interpret that many different ways. It's that the temperature is cold, in addition to the climate is rather cold in particular. And I don't know if it's that like one influenced the other or like one way or another in terms of its capacity. But I'd say that with regards to that, it really influenced how I interpreted, say, making new friends in addition to dating relationships and other things from there. I like the atmosphere in terms of there was somebody who had made a Facebook group conveniently named Make Friends After College, and they grew it to a point of when I was still living there, they had about, I want to say 7,000 people. I'd say it has gone towards, I want to say it has more than 10,000 people now, last time I checked. But when I was still living there, they'd create like bigger than life events. And it was really cool to see somebody creating these spaces for people. Because for Boston, I would say that people consider it more like a walkable space. I would say it's that Boston is relatively small for a metropolitan city, and it's that within a few hours you can go like one end to the other at end of day. But with considerations to public transportation, it is America's oldest public transportation, and do with that what you will in terms of interpretation. For me, it's that there's lots of closures and different things, and it made it a bit of a nightmare to get around in terms of meeting new people and doing stuff more on the weekdays. I'd say that's just my perspective on how like it impacts things at the end of the day. I would say for me it's that there had been different community outings and different things that this Make Friends After College group made, in addition to different board game outings and different hobbies or different interest based ones were around there in particular. I think for me, the hard selling point for Boston was that everything closed around like 8:30 p.m. ish. So it's really hard to just like do stuff or get things done in terms of not only like the going out scene, but say just like even like everyday chores in particular, and just like finding yourself like things to do or keep preoccupied with. It felt that after hours are really hard for people, and it's you have to like get a lot of things done in terms of like whether it's planning, say specifically day for chores or different things. And I think looking back, it's more of a time management thing. I think Boston for me, it's that it was a bit harder for people to get around and do things in terms of make friends and do others and different things. I interpreted people as more closed off and not as approachable. I think that's in comparison to more the Midwest and my exposure to different people from there on. I think in my perspective of things, I lived in Boston and then Cambridge respectively. Think of them as, I don't want to like overstep in terms of when I talk about like Boston and Cambridge, because while they're right next to each other, they have completely distinct but also similar vibes at certain respects. Because for Boston, I would think of it as more just like more scholarly, more just like old American history in addition to different things. With just, I remember people joking about, oh, we are going to a pub that is near this thing of American significance in terms of history or different things. Like, you get the general gist. But when I think of Cambridge, I think of like Harvard and like MIT and the general vicinity of things, of like really smart college educated folks, engineers, and different people. And I won't just like paint broad strokes with different populations, but I would say from my perspective, it's that everybody is, I say I won't paint broad strokes, and then I say the word everybody. I caught myself, but I'd say for folks that they are well received in terms of being able to be well spoken in terms of just, how do I put this? Well spoken in terms of like be on good terms with other people, and more so just book smart in terms of things. But it might come off as just like very cold and very just like straight to the point in terms of things. I'd say that like New Englanders or Bostonians are very blunt and very to the point as well. I think the difficulty I had with making friends and different things in this environment was that, since it's more of like a college town city environment, I found that a lot of the post grad people had made their friends while they're attending college, and then they'd continue from that point and be a bit like walled off in particular and not as accommodating. I would say this is not all encompassing, as I know that some of my friends that I made there, they have their friend group there now more fully established and being more comfortable with that in particular. I think looking back, it's that friendships I'd made there were more floating around a bit, or straddling here and there, because I think a lot of them just like use PTO more as a travel, and they more involved more of like the travel nomad type environment, where I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan of it. Like, go do you at the end of the day, but it's like, I think that's hard to be conducive to like friendships at the end of the day when you're always like traveling and going about. Like, I won't like go into a full like tangent about it, but it's what it is. Now moving on to New York. So for New York City, I think it's like, for such a big city, it is also hard to paint broad strokes. Note when I'm talking about all these different cities, it's just talking from my viewpoint at least. And I think Varun Rana made a good video about this where he talked about like, oh, I was trying to find a good fit for a city for me, but I think it's the end of the day, all these cities offer you similar type deals, and it's just about you being more cognizant of where you spend your time and where you put your time. And I think that spoke to me, in which follows of what I'll talk about for New York City, at least for me, and that perspective. So for New York City, I think I interpret it as more of a techie / finance type environment. I would say that as somebody that has lived in more of the Clinton Hill area of Brooklyn. And I know when you say that as like, I worked as like a designer in Brooklyn at that time, that comes off as a bit like snobby, or like, oh yeah, that's very Brooklyn of, no, that's not how you say it. No one says that's very Brooklyn. I'm not a true New Yorker or like true Bostonian or Chicago or one way or another. I'm born and raised in Jersey, but I'm just interpreting how it was living in these different cities from my own perspective. Have that with what you will in terms of interpretation. So in New York City, at least, my interpretation was more tech and finance based. I'd found a community where somebody had taken a similar concept of this like making friends after college type deal, and it was cool. I'd say it was similar in the realm of like they'd have different activities such as board games or outdoor sports and different ones as well, or like say like walking or different things. I'd say for this one it was too techy for me. Is I think the last thing I want to do like after work hours is more like talk more about work and different things. I think it's like I think New York City is a very more career driven place. Not that Boston is not or like Chicago is not in their own respects. I think all those places are places where people go for advancement in terms of their career and their education. I just find it that they're very outspoken with it in New York City, where very blunt about what it is that you do for work or these different things. And I did not find it more stimulating to me in these conversations. It's more that there's a time and place to it. And if I sign up for like a networking deal or like different event or different thing, then I'd be expecting it. I just do not expect that from, or I do not necessarily want that in every facet of my life when I just want to make friends and different things. Having said that, I think it's more that I found that it had more of like a techie hub space in terms of things. I think that ended up being a very big turnoff for me, as how it was just like very overwhelming towards that. And it was just sort of a turnoff because there was just people talking about like, oh, I work in this company. I also work at that company. Oh, I work at this company. Like, find some hobbies, find stuff you do for fun or like different things. It wasn't very engaging to me. And it's like, I think it's healthy to separate what you do for work and your hobbies and different things. But I think it's like, say you work in like software and different things, it's perfectly normal to say like you work and code on projects for fun, or you work on say like different apps for video games or different things that you want to get off the ground. Like that's acceptable in terms of things, but like I won't gatekeep like what people do in their free time. It just wasn't quite for me in terms of things. I think for that, it's that I have only exposure to more of the surface level for what New York City had in store. And I hadn't really dipped my feet into meetups at that time or just like different things in particular. I think the same could be said for like Austin in particular, but I think for that it's more that how I approached it. I felt that in those spaces, it felt that people who that might use those apps might be significantly older than me, or it might be not be as relatable for me as a person. I think for those were some reasons that I eventually like left New York in particular and different things. I'm trying to think like different things overall. I think I wanted to be more deliberate in how I spent my time. So I spent time taking, say, comedy classes in addition to spending time around creatives and different things, in addition to the workspace that I'm in. I also took time to be a part of the fitness community there in addition to the other things there. I would say that was similar to how I approached it in Boston to a certain extent in terms of joining a chapter of, say, November Project, or that one is more of a city to city hub and spoke type system where different cities work on different like fitness and outdoors type deals, and you just get a good workout in and you just meet some new people and then talk over like coffee or different things afterwards. I'd say to close things out, I then moved to Boston. Sorry, I misspoke. So, well, sort of. I moved back to Boston to try to connect back with friends and see if it worked for me. Unfortunately, it did not, hence why I'm back here now to Chicago. Well, not back, like moved physically to Chicago after moving to Boston and finding it not being a physical fit for me. So now that means I have lived in these three major cities, and I'm now over past a year now in Chicago, and it has been a good fit for me. I think this time around, I'm trying to remove the bias I have with all these cities and looking at it in a more objective point of view if I'm able to. I interpret Chicago as a more better space for me, in which, so environment wise, it's the Midwest. It's pretty friendly in terms of things. I think New York, Boston, they're pretty like blunt in particular. I think like for Midwest, I don't think people mind like when you just strike up a conversation with them, or just like it doesn't rub people the wrong way one way or another, and people are generally like very friendly in particular. When I moved to this city, in terms of things, I had my friend Bill, where he introduced me to his friends that he had, whether it's like some that went to his same alma mater or like some of his coworkers. And I try to branch out in terms of doing the fitness groups, and now with that aside, I tried different meetups or Eventbrite or different things, and just finding myself at different places, whether it's like Laugh Factory with their like 2 drink minimum or different things, or taking comedy classes at the IO Theater in off the Red Line, in addition to taking like a second city like drop-in class with Capel and like some friends or different things, and just like immersing myself into the different run clubs as I did in say like a Boston or New York, and finding myself lost in that. I think what made Chicago a good fit for me was that I kept on trying these things, and I think for me it was I didn't have a certain destination in mind with what I wanted out of all these things. I think concretely what I wanted was like friendships and connection and different things. But I think what made it hard for me was that I felt very transient in terms of all this, of like, oh well, what if this doesn't work out? Do I have to move again? Or should I just go back home and just figure out from there, or different things? I think for Chicago, it has been very accommodating in terms of being pretty friendly, in addition to being a good space to meet different people of different backgrounds. And it's allowed me to be able to try these different meetups and try these different interest groups, such as like take these comedy classes or try out these fitness groups or try out these different meetups, create a meetup and create like a community or given space or a different thing in particular, and just eventually see what sticks and see where you might find community and see how you approach adulting as a whole. And I like to say that with how I formatted it, it's might seem like, say, like more like a negative view versus for say like a Boston or a New York or different things, or slight against one or another. And I'd say I don't want it to be perceived that way. I would say that for Boston and in New York, that I spent a bunch of my time more by myself at times, and I'd say a lot of days were like I just say like you just celebrate with like takeout and like you working on a personal project, or like you'd stay in and just like watch some TV and like work on personal projects, or just like go for a workout and different things, and not fully immersing yourself. And I think it's easy to say from this perspective looking back, but it's like, oh, well, what if you had been as proactive in terms of trying these meetups for different things in these different cities? And it just allows me to reflect back to this video I recently saw from Varun Rana, where he was like, you can experience all these different things in all these different cities. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to come up with a conclusion for what you might be looking for at the end of the day and what experiences that you made of it. I can say for myself that I've enjoyed my experience in Chicago so far, and I made and what I made of it is from all the hard work that I put in terms of creating community, fostering community, in addition to putting myself out there and trying to just, well, keep on adulting, keep on trying new things, and accepting when things don't work out, when celebrate when things do work out, and just continuing to try new things and being actively engaged. As for takeaways and just the too long didn't read of it, is that I made a lot of like rash or more spontaneous decisions when I was a bit younger, which led me living in now 3 major metropolitan cities. And I find myself liking one of them the most because I find people that are better aligned with what I want to do in terms of personality fit and different things. But that isn't a slight against any other one for not being a match for me, because I'm sure that in a different timeline, that if I had done different things in a different way, that I'd be elsewhere or have friends elsewhere in terms of things. I'm forever grateful for the friends that I have today and up till this point. My friend Kapil for welcoming me with open arms when I first moved to Illinois, and being one of many of what I can call a community to this very day, of being able to create a community and being able to do that while juggling and finding out what adulting looks like for me. I think this goes long enough, and I am honestly, I'd say, losing my voice almost, having like done several of these in a row. But if you have made it this far, thank you for tuning in. And as always, don't forget to be awesome. I will say that again in a coherent voice, but as always, don't forget to be awesome.